Hi, JDL Brushes here, and this video is brought to you by the Marker Brush Pack. Alright, so this time we have a different reference photo, this time concerning a toilet. And it's actually a portrait kind of reference, so yeah. Now this time I'm actually starting out with a rough sketch. I'm just trying to lay out the major planes of the scene, and it actually doesn't have to be that precise. It's okay to keep it rough, at least for my style, and you'll see how I basically disregard the sketch in the end, because it's not intended to be or part of the end result. It's more of a primer or a tool to guide my rendering. And even the water closet is kind of off. You can see me kind of try and fix that up, but yeah. So it's really more about just plotting down the general idea and blocking in those major forms or planes or shapes. And I did lighten it or decreased the opacity of that sketch layer, and now I'm working on I call it the flats layer, where I just work on the flats. It's where I use most of my selection tools, especially the marquee, not the marquee, the polygonal line tool. Polygonal lasso tool, I'm sorry. And yeah, and I do this all in one layer for the most part. And I actually accidentally forgot to or my brush was set into a 50% opacity, so I had to double the layer. I just I duplicated the layer or this whole layer of flats. So yeah, so now I'm just working on the wall, and I was actually color picking the original photo, but as you can see, because of the 50% opacity, it's not transferring as well. But I'll be able to fix that eventually by duplicating this whole layer. So now I'm just working on the selections, and I'm not so worried about the edges. So you can actually see some white space, and to me it adds some human touch. It adds a human touch to your work, because I think making mistakes is one of the most human things you could do, and this adds to that in some way. And yeah, and it's just fun to not be so robotic about your work. And yeah, so I did fill up the floor, and I believe, and you can actually see I pretty much kind of blocked out a specific rectangular frame where you don't see any kind of white space breaking into that view. And I actually like it. You can see some jagged edges around the composition, but yeah, it's actually kind of cool. And you saw me just duplicate that layer right there, and I did work on the water closet in a new layer because I needed to be safe with that part, right? And now after that, I worked on a new layer, but this time working on the darker shades by setting the layer on multiply mode and then picking the color of interest out from the sketch below and then using that to kind of render out on the new multiply layer for the darker shades. And yeah, so there's the first layer, the flats, and some, special layers. And then after that, you work on the darker shades or the shadows under or with a multiply mode layer effect. So yeah, and you can see me work on the kind of drop shadow of those sinks. Yep. And right about now, I think I'm going to work on the that push button thing just above the water closet, and yeah. And what am I doing now? I'm not sure when I added some of the fine lines, but yeah, right now I know I'm using the overlay. I'm working on a new layer in overlay mode, and again adding a little more hues. Well, they're not that different in terms of color palette because I'm picking from the exact same sketch, but it does add more variety, and it often helps to lighten up certain areas. Or if ever I want to add a lighter shade, I just use an overlay or maybe a color dodge moded layer. And right about now you can see me use some of the finer lines. It just adds more definition, right? Especially in the edges or corners of some of the furniture or flooring or walls. And you can also use it for some highlights when you're using white, right? And any other detail, really. So yeah. Yep, and as you can see, it's actually getting tighter and better. And I'm actually kind of surprised how this sketch turned out, because again, I'm experimenting, but I did like this kind of rendering approach, and it's probably the same way I'm going to render the following sketches, because it's pretty decent looking, if I may. And now I'm adding some more fine lines for those tiles just behind the water closet. And you can see how your work gets better over time. And so I think it's a good thing to do is just to trust your process, and of course you also need to experiment with your process, but do understand that eventually you'll get to a better looking product in the end. So now you can see me use some of the color balance, playing with the shadows and highlights and the midtones, and just finding the kind of feel that I want. And I think I found it right about now. and just adjusted the levels to make it more, to add more contrast, right? So that is the final interior sketch. Not bad at all, pretty good. Whichever your art, whatever your tool, make it beautiful.